My son spent $400 on a cheese board for his mother-in-law's birthday. I know because he told me about it himself, proud as anything. Standing in my kitchen the same afternoon, he'd handed me a gift card to a gas station chain, the kind they sell at checkout counters next to the energy drinks. $12. I know it was 12 because I looked it up later, not out of bitterness, but because I wanted to be sure I wasn't misremembering. I wasn't. I'm 64 years old. I taught high school history for 31 years in the same district where I grew up, the same hallways I'd walked as a kid. I coached JV baseball for 11 of those years. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after my wife, Patricia, passed from ovarian cancer when our son was 9 and our daughter was 6. I did not remarry. I did not ask anyone for help I couldn't pay back. I kept the house, kept the job, kept the lights on. That was the deal I made with myself the night Patricia died, sitting in the hospital parking garage because I couldn't make myself drive home to children who didn't yet know their mother was gone. I'm telling you all of this not because I want your sympathy. I'm telling you because it matters for what comes next. My son's name is Archer. He's 37. He works in corporate finance, makes good money, drives a car that costs more than I made in 2 years at my peak salary. He married a woman named Sylvie whose parents are wealthy in the old money. Don't talk about it way. Her father is retired. Her mother collects art. They vacation in places I've only seen in magazines, and they do it regularly, the way other people go to the grocery store. Archer is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, because it would be easier, I think, to frame him as a villain. He's not. He loves his children. He works hard. He calls me on my birthday without being reminded. But somewhere along the way, and I've spent a long time trying to figure out exactly where, he started measuring people by what they could offer him. Not consciously, not cruelly, just quietly, the way a habit forms. His in-laws had money and connections, and a social world he wanted to belong to. I had a 3-bedroom house in a mid-sized Ohio town, and a pension that covered my bills with about $200 left over each month. I think you can see where this is going. The gas station gift card was for my 63rd birthday. The cheese board for Sylvie's mother came 3 weeks later. I found out about it at Sunday dinner, the way I found out about most things in my son's life by then, accidentally, because he mentioned it in passing while talking about something else. The way you mentioned the weather. I thanked him for the card. I used it to fill my tank on a Tuesday. I told myself it didn't matter. But here's the thing about telling yourself something doesn't matter. If it really didn't matter, you wouldn't need to tell yourself. I started keeping a journal that fall. Not to document the slights. That sounds too deliberate, too planned. I started it because my daughter, who lives in Portland and calls me every Sunday, and who I will not say a single critical word about in this entire story, suggested I write things down. She'd noticed I seemed quieter than usual during our calls. She said, "Dad, just write it down. You don't have to do anything with it. Just get it out of your head." So I did, and once I started writing, I couldn't stop. 30 years of small moments I hadn't let myself examine too closely. The graduation party where Archer arranged seating, so I was at a table with people I didn't know while he and Sylvie sat with her family. The time he introduced me to his colleagues at a work event, and I watched him visibly search for something impressive to say about me and come up with. He was a teacher, not even the subject, not even the years, just a teacher. The look on his face in the half-second before he composed it. I wrote all of it down, and then I put the journal in my desk drawer and tried to focus on the things that were going right. The thing that was most right was this. I had bought a lottery ticket. I know how that sounds. A retired school teacher buying a lottery ticket is not exactly a story of financial sophistication, but I'd bought one every week for about 15 years, the same numbers every time. Patricia's birthday, the kids' birthdays, the year we got married. It was less about winning and more about a small ritual, a few seconds every week of letting myself imagine something different. $2, a harmless indulgence in October. 2 weeks after my 64th birthday, I won, not the jackpot. Let me be clear about that too. I won enough. $412,000. After taxes, somewhere around $280,000. I sat in my car in the gas station parking lot for about 20 minutes after I checked the ticket on my phone. Then I drove home, made a cup of coffee, and sat at my kitchen table trying to decide what to do. The first person I called was my daughter. She screamed loud enough that I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and then she cried, and then she made me promise not to tell anyone else for at least a week while we figured out what to do. I promised. I kept the promise for 9 days. Then Archer called. He called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. He usually called on weekends if he called at all, and even that wasn't consistent. His voice when I picked up had that particular quality I'd learned to recognize over the years. The slightly elevated energy, the warmth that appeared reliably when he needed something. He said, "Dad, I wanted to run something by you." I said, "Sure." He said he and Sylvie were looking at an investment property, a vacation rental near Lake Erie, a go market, a solid opportunity. But the timing was tight and they needed a bridge loan to cover the gap between their current position and the down payment, just short term. He'd looked into traditional lenders, but the timeline didn't work. He was wondering if I had anything set aside. He mentioned a figure, $40,000. I want to pause here and tell you what I felt in that moment, because I've thought about it many times since. I didn't feel angry. I felt something quieter and sadder than anger. I felt like I was looking at a photograph of something that used to be one thing, and had slowly, without anyone deciding it, become something else entirely. I asked him how the property search was going, how the kids were, whether Sylvie's parents had recovered from their trip to the Amalfi Coast. I was pleasant. I was warm. I said I'd think about it and get back to him. Then I hung up and opened my journal and wrote for about an hour. The next morning, I called my attorney, a woman I'd known for over 20 years who'd helped me with Patricia's estate and had become something like a trusted advisor over the years. I told her about the lottery winnings. I told her about Archer's request. I told her I was thinking about some changes. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What kind of changes are you thinking?" I said I wanted to update my estate documents. I wanted to establish a small foundation in Patricia's name. Nothing enormous. Just something directed toward local families dealing with a cancer diagnosis, covering some of the practical costs that fall through the cracks. Childcare, transportation, meals. I wanted to set aside money for my grandchildren's education accounts in a structure that went directly to them, not through their parents. And I wanted to think carefully about what I owed my son and what I didn't. My attorney said, "Take your time. There's no rush here." I took my time. What I did not do, during those weeks of taking my time, was agree to the $40,000. I told Archer I'd looked at my finances, and I wasn't in a position to do it. I kept my voice even when I said it. He was quiet for a moment and then said he understood, and I could hear that he didn't. Not really, that he'd expected a different answer. I wonder now what he thought I had. A teacher's savings, a modest house, not $40,000 available on short notice, surely. He didn't know about the lottery ticket. I hadn't told him. The investment property deal fell through, apparently. He mentioned it in passing a few weeks later without a great deal of emotion, which told me the urgency had perhaps been overstated to begin with. Christmas that year was at Archer's house. It was a nice house. They'd renovated the kitchen the previous year, open concept, quartz countertops, the kind of kitchen that photographs well. Sylvie's parents were there. Her brother and his wife were there. There were 12 people around the table, and the food was catered, which I only knew because I overheard Sylvie telling her mother the name of the company. My gift from Archer and Sylvie was a bathrobe. It was a nice bathrobe, thick and well made, the kind from a department store. I thanked them for it genuinely. A bathrobe is a useful thing. I watched Archer present his in-laws with an envelope that turned out to contain tickets to a Broadway show in New York. 3 nights at a hotel included. Sylvie's mother pressed her hands together and said it was too much, in the way that people say it's too much when they mean it's exactly right. Sylvie's father shook Archer's hand. I wore the bathrobe home. I want to tell you about a Tuesday in February, because that's when things shifted. I had driven to the grocery store, which I did every Tuesday morning, a habit I'd developed in retirement, because Tuesday mornings the store is quiet and the produce is restocked from the weekend. I was in the parking lot loading bags into my trunk when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I picked up anyway. The man on the other end identified himself as a financial counselor from a nonprofit that worked with families in debt. He was calling because my name had come up in connection with a referral. He said he was trying to reach someone who might be able to speak to the character of a local financial services firm. The name of the firm was one I recognized. It was the same firm Archer had joined as a partner 18 months earlier. I said I wasn't sure how I could help, but I was willing to listen. He said the organization had been contacted by several families. He said several, but I later found out the number was closer to 20, who had taken out loans through the firm under terms they hadn't fully understood, variable interest structures, prepayment penalties buried in the fine print, balloon payments at terms that made refinancing almost impossible. He said these were not wealthy families. He said some of them were facing foreclosure. I sat in my car in the grocery store parking lot for a long time after that call. I want to be precise about what I did next, because I think precision matters here. I did not panic. I did not call Archer. I did not do anything for 3 days except go about my normal routine and think. On the 4th day, I called my attorney. She listened. She asked careful questions. She said, "Before we do anything, we need to understand what his role actually was. Being a partner at a firm that has problematic practices is not the same thing as being responsible for those practices." I said, "I know. That's why I'm calling you and not the newspaper." She made some calls. What she found, over the following 2 weeks, was not what I'd hoped to find. Archer had not designed the loan structures, but he had known about them. He had been present in meetings where the targeting strategy was discussed, directing these products toward families in specific income brackets who were unlikely to read fine print carefully. He had raised no objection. He had, in fact, brought in 2 of the accounts himself. I will not describe what it felt like to read the summary my attorney prepared. I will say only that I sat with it for a long time, and that I thought about Patricia, and that I thought about the man I'd tried to raise my son to be, and that those 2 things did not line up with what was on the pages in front of me. I did not call Archer, not yet. What I did was spend a week visiting 2 of the families affected. My attorney connected me with the nonprofit counselor, who in turn connected me with the families who had agreed to speak with someone. I drove to their houses. I sat at their kitchen tables. I listened. One family had 3 children. The youngest was 7, the same age my daughter had been when Patricia died. The father had worked in logistics for 16 years, and had taken out the loan to cover medical bills from his wife's surgery. He showed me the paperwork. He said, "I'm not a stupid man. I just didn't see it until it was too late." I said, "No, you're not stupid. The structure was designed for you not to see it." When I got home that evening, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. Then I called my attorney and told her I wanted to help. Not with litigation, that wasn't my place, and it wasn't my fight to lead. But I could contribute to the costs. Legal fees for families who couldn't afford representation. The foundation I'd been planning could absorb some of this work alongside the cancer support mission. She said, "That's generous, but you understand this may become public. Your son's name will be part of this." I said, "I understand." Then I made the call I'd been putting off. Archer picked up on the second ring. He sounded normal, relaxed, the version of himself that existed when he wasn't asking for anything. I asked about the grandchildren. I asked about a work project he'd mentioned in passing the last time we'd spoken. Then I said, "There's something I need to talk to you about. I'd rather do it in person." He drove out the following Saturday. He arrived at 11, and I made coffee, and we sat at the kitchen table where I'd done most of the serious thinking of my adult life. I told him what I knew. I told him carefully, without drama, without accusation in my voice. I laid it out the way I used to lay out a history lesson. Here are the facts, here is the timeline, here is what the evidence shows. He was quiet for a long time when I finished. Then he said, "How did you?" and stopped. I said, "Does it matter how I found out?" He said, "Dad, it wasn't," and stopped again. I waited. I had learned in 31 years of teaching teenagers that silence is one of the most powerful tools available to a person who wants the truth. Most people cannot sit with silence. They fill it. If you wait long enough, they fill it with something real. Archer filled it with. The structure was already in place when I joined the partnership. I didn't build it. I said, "But you knew." He didn't answer, which was its own answer. I said, "There are 22 families. Some of them are losing their homes." He looked at the table. I said, "I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a regulator. I'm not the person who decides what consequences look like for you professionally or legally. But I need you to understand that I know, and that what I know changes things." He looked up. Changes what things? I had prepared for this question. I'd thought about it for weeks, actually, turning it over in the way you turn a stone over to see what's underneath. I said, I won a lottery ticket. The one you gave me for my birthday 2 years ago, as a joke, the crumpled one, the $2 ticket you handed me in the parking lot on the way to your car. He stared at me. I said, I won enough to be comfortable for the rest of my life. I've already used some of it to establish a foundation in your mother's name. Some of it is going to help the families your firm damaged pay for legal representation. The color left his face in a way I had never seen before. I said, I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it because it's right. And I'm telling you about the money because I want you to understand that the version of me you've been relating to for the past several years, the retired teacher with the gas station gift cards, that was always a temporary condition. It just wasn't the condition I thought would change it. He said, Dad? I said, I love you. That has not changed, and it will not change. But love is not the same as approval, and it is not the same as money. Those are 3 separate things, and I think somewhere along the way you stopped knowing the difference. He left 2 hours later. He hadn't touched his coffee. In the weeks that followed, he called several times. The calls were different from his previous calls. Less careful, more ragged at the edges, the kind of calls where you can hear that a person has been thinking too hard and sleeping too little. He asked questions. He apologized. Not the smooth apologies of someone managing a situation, but the halting, repetitive kind that don't quite know what they're trying to say. I did not make it easy, but I did not cut him off. The legal situation at the firm developed over the following months in ways I won't detail here because it's not fully resolved, and because the families involved deserve their privacy. What I will say is that Archer chose, eventually, to cooperate with the investigation rather than protect the partners who had built the structure. My attorney told me this was not a small decision. I know it wasn't. My daughter came to visit in the spring. We sat on the back porch in the evening, the way Patricia and I used to do, and she said, Do you feel better? Now that it's all out in the open? I thought about it honestly. I said, I feel more like myself. She said, That's the same thing, Dad. Maybe she's right. I'm not sure I'm the right person to evaluate my own sense of resolution. What I know is this. I wake up in the morning in a house that is paid off, that I kept through a long stretch of years when keeping it required everything I had. I drink my coffee. I write in my journal. Twice a week I drive to a community center where I volunteer with a tutoring program for adults pursuing their GED. The woman who runs the program is sharp and funny and takes no nonsense from anyone, and she reminds me, honestly, a little bit of Patricia. I still have not spent the winnings on anything extravagant. I don't want anything extravagant. I wanted, I think, what I've always wanted, to know that the years meant something, that the work was real, that the people I loved were worth the loving. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, and the 3rd one is still in progress. I suppose that's the most honest thing I can tell you. I don't know yet how the story ends with my son. I know how I want it to end. I know what I'm willing to do to help it get there. But I also know, finally at 64, sitting on a back porch in Ohio watching the light change over a yard I've mowed 1,000 times, that some things cannot be forced into resolution. Some things you tend to, carefully, the way you tend a garden in a short season, not knowing what will come up, but putting the work in anyway, because the alternative is to stop believing anything grows at all. Patricia believed things grew. She believed it right up to the end. I am trying, still, to be the kind of man who deserves to have been loved by someone like that.